Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we dig into the sources you share, pull out the key insights, and basically give you a shortcut to getting up to speed.
And today, yeah, we're jumping into something that, well, it affects everyone. Money.
Yeah,
Specifically, the psychology behind how we think about it, how we handle it.
exactly. We've been looking at Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money, focusing on the introduction and that first chapter, No One's Crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And our goal, our mission here, is to unpack this core idea he presents, that doing well with money, it might have less to do with how smart you are, like your IQ, and way more to do with how you behave.
Right. And tied to that, why people often have such, well, different approaches to money, approaches that sometimes look completely irrational from the
It
outside.
maybe aren't. Once you understand their background, their unique experiences, we've got some pretty surprising stories that challenge a lot of common ideas.
Definitely. So let's start with that main argument from the intro. Housel says, look, financial success isn't really about raw intelligence. It's about behavior. And behavior, that's the tricky part. It's really hard to teach, he argues, even to very, very smart people.
Which feels a bit backwards, right? We usually assume smarter people must be better with money.
You'd think. But he kicks off with these stories that just blow that idea up. Like the tech executive, the guy who was literally a genius, helped invent key parts of Wi-Fi.
Yeah, incredibly successful financially, you'd assume.
On paper, yes. But his actual behavior with money, it was chaotic. Housel describes him carrying these thick wads of $100 bills, bragging constantly,
Oh, wow.
and doing things like throwing $1,000 gold coins into the ocean, like skipping stones.
You threw gold coins into the ocean.
Yeah. Or another time, in a hotel restaurant, he accidentally breaks a lamp. The manager says it costs $500.
Wow, okay.
So the executive pulls out $5,000 in cash, throws it at the manager, and shouts something like,
Get out of my face. Don't ever insult me like that again. I remember reading that.
yeah,
Wild.
totally wild. And, you know, the punchline. Despite the genius, the initial success, he went broke, lost it all.
Just underscores that point, doesn't it?
Yeah.
High intelligence doesn't guarantee good financial behavior at all.
Not even close. And then Housel gives us the flip side, Ronald Reed,
Ah, the janitor.
the janitor and gas station attendant from Vermont. Humble background, first in his family to finish high school, apparently hitchhiked there every day,
Wow.
worked those jobs for decades, lived in a small house his whole life, main hobby was chopping firewood. Not exactly a Wall Street type.
Definitely not. So what's his story?
Well, when he died in 2014, age 92, this quiet, unassuming guy, he left behind a fortune of over $8 million.
Wait, 8 million? How
Uh-huh.
did he win the lottery or something?
Nope. No lottery, no big inheritance. It was actually incredibly simple. He just saved consistently, put his money into solid blue chip stocks,
Okay.
and then he did the hardest part. He just waited. For decades. Let compounding do its thing.
Wow. So no complex strategies, just saving and patience.
That's it. From janitor to multimillionaire benefactor for his local library and hospital.
So you've got the genius exec going broke, the humble janitor becoming wealthy. And the book also mentions Richard Physcology, another finance guy.
Right. Harvard educated, top Merrill Lynch executive, praised for his financial mind, retired early to a huge mansion.
Let me guess.
Yep. Borrowed heavily to fund it, got hammered in the 2008 crisis, and he also went bankrupt.
So education, experience, intelligence, none of those were the deciding factor. It really came down to behavior. Saving versus borrowing, patience versus impatience.
Exactly. And Housel makes this great point. This is kind of unique to finance, isn't it?
How so?
Well, think about it. Can someone with zero medical training perform better surgery than a top surgeon? Or design a safer bridge than an expert engineer?
No, of course not. There's a knowledge barrier, a skill barrier.
Right. But in finance, these stories like Ronald Reed's do happen. Someone with no formal training can outperform the experts.
Okay, yeah. That's a really interesting point.
So Housel argues that this means finance isn't really a hard science like physics, with fixed rules and formulas guaranteeing success. It's softer. It's much more about psychology.
Your behavior, your temperament,
Mhm.
is more important than the textbook knowledge.
Precisely. Which is why finance is often taught the wrong way, he thinks. Like it's math or physics, just follow the rules, use the models.
Yeah, save 10%, diversify this way, rebalance that often.
Yeah, knowing what to do is often the easy bit. The real struggle is what's going on in your head when you try to implement that plan.
Like when the market tanks and everything in you screams sell, even though you know you should hold on.
Exactly. Or seeing your neighbor buy a fancy car and feeling that pressure to keep up. even if it means dipping into savings. It's the emotions, the biases, the ego.
It makes sense. Think about other fields, like medicine. We've made incredible scientific progress, right? Longer lifespans, better treatments.
Definitely. Science advanced, we figured out what works better.
But have we seen the same kind of progress in, like, average financial behavior? Are people today inherently better savers than 50 years ago? Less prone to debt traps? More realistic about money and happiness?
Probably not, right? Globally, we still seem to wrestle with the same issues. Greed, fear, short-term thinking, comparing ourselves.
So the knowledge might be out there, but the behavior hasn't fundamentally changed, which points back to psychology being the key.
It touches everyone, confuses most of us, and we all see it through our own individual lens.
That quote comes to mind, Voltaire. History never repeats itself. Man always does. That behavioral consistency.
Yeah, that fits perfectly. And it's a great segue into that first chapter. No one's crazy.
Right. The idea being people do stuff with money that looks completely nuts to outsiders.
But from their perspective, given their experiences, maybe it makes perfect sense. Maybe no one's actually crazy.
Okay, let's unpack that. How can seemingly irrational financial decisions be not crazy?
So the core idea Housel puts forward is this. Our personal experiences with money, right? They make up this infinitesimally small fraction of all financial history, like 0.00 something percent.
A tiny sliver.
Tiny sliver. But those few personal experiences, he suggests, they shape something like 80% of how we believe the entire financial world actually works.
Wow. So my little life bubble dictates almost my whole worldview on money.
Pretty much. And everyone's bubble is different, right? Different generation, different upbringing, different country, different luck. So we all end up with vastly different mental models.
Okay.
What seems reckless to you might seem perfectly normal or even necessary to me, just based on the reality I've lived through.
Yeah, I can see that. Like someone who grew up poor versus someone who grew up wealthy will have totally different instincts about spending and saving.
Or think about inflation. If you lived through the 70s with prices soaring, that experience is burned into you. You feel inflation risk differently than someone born in the 90s who's mostly seen low, stable prices.
It's not just intellectual knowledge, it's an emotional memory.
Exactly. Housel uses the example of JFK, who admitted he had no firsthand knowledge of the Great Depression because his family actually got wealthier then. He could read about it, study it.
But he didn't feel the fear, the uncertainty.
Right. And you can't truly replicate that feeling just by reading. Like, reading about hunger isn't the same as being hungry. Those lived experiences leave deep marks, shape your biases in ways pure logic struggles to overcome.
Is there, like, data to back this up? Or is it more of an intuitive idea?
Oh, there's data. He points to research by economists Malmendier and Nagel. They analyzed decades of data from the Survey of Consumer Finances.
And what did they find?
They found that people's long-term investment decisions, like how much they put in stocks versus bonds, were heavily influenced by the market conditions they personally experienced, especially when they were young adults.
So not based on their education level or income, but just the luck of when they grew up.
Largely, yes. If you came of age during a bull market, you tended to invest more in stocks later on. If you experienced high inflation early in adulthood, you tend to shy away from bonds, even decades later.
Wow. So my investment strategy might just be an echo of what the S&P 500 did when I was 20? That's mumbling.
It's a powerful, often invisible influence. Housel gives these great examples based on birth year, someone born in 1970. In their teens and 20s, the stock market, inflation adjusted, went up almost 10x.
Okay, so their baseline is stocks go to the moon.
Pretty much. But someone born in 1950, during their teens and 20s, the market, adjusted for inflation, basically went nowhere, flat.
So their baseline is stocks are dead money.
Exactly. Now imagine those two people trying to agree on an investment plan. They're operating from fundamentally different realities shaped purely by their birth year lottery.
And you see the same thing with inflation experiences, right?
Totally. Born in the 1960s, you saw prices triple in your youth.
Yeah.
Born in 1990, inflation's mostly been a non-issue. Those experiences create completely different instincts about saving, debt, risk.
It makes you realize how hard it is to judge someone else's financial choices without knowing their history.
Absolutely. And it's not just about Western stock markets. He includes that Foxconn example.
Ah, yeah, the factory conditions often described as a sweatshop in the West.
Right. But then he shares this perspective from someone whose aunt worked there, saying, look, before that factory job, her only option was prostitution.
Whoa.
So compared to that baseline reality, the factory job, however tough it looks to us, was a massive step up for her.
It powerfully illustrates how different starting points completely change the definition of bad or good or an opportunity.
It really does, and it loops back to no one's crazy. What seems nuts from your reality might be the most rational choice available from theirs, like lottery tickets.
Right. Americans spend billions, especially lower-income folks. Mathematically, it seems insane.
From a pure odds perspective, yes. Terrible investment, wasting money that could be used elsewhere.
So why do people do it?
Well, Housel suggests looking beyond the spreadsheet. For someone in a really tough spot, maybe saving feels impossible, better jobs seem out of reach. That comfortable middle-class life feels like a fantasy.
Okay.
Buying that lottery ticket might be the only way they feel they can purchase the dream of escaping. It's not just about the tiny chance of winning, it's about buying hope.
Buying the feeling of possibility, even for a little while.
Exactly. Paying for the fantasy. And when you frame it that way, while the math is still bad, the behavior starts to make a kind of emotional sense. It's a reminder that financial decisions aren't made in a vacuum. They're tangled up with history, emotions, ego, hope, despair.
That makes a lot of sense. And it also connects to that other point the book makes, how surprisingly new so much of our modern financial world actually is.
Yes. This is such a critical piece. We think of money concepts as ancient, but the systems we use daily, many are incredibly recent. Take retirement.
Okay, what about it?
The whole idea that most people just stop working around 65 and live comfortably, that's maybe only 2 generations old. Before WWII, most people worked until they basically dropped.
So Social Security changed things, but slowly.
Very slowly. The first checks in 1940 were tiny. It wasn't designed to fully replace income for decades. And private pensions, also not widespread or substantial for most people until much later. Like in 1975, only about a quarter of seniors even had pension income.
And the main tool for retirement saving today for many people, the 401k.
Didn't even exist until 1978. The Roth IRA came along in 1998.
Wow, that's incredibly recent. They're younger than me.
Exactly. So we are all collectively absolute beginners at this whole self-directed retirement saving game. We haven't had centuries to figure it out. We've had a few decades.
We're essentially learning on the fly.
Pretty much. And it's the same for other things. Widespread college attendance with huge tuition, mostly a post-WWII thing, index funds, less than 50 years old, hedge funds as a major force, maybe 25 years, mass consumer credit card debt really took off after the war.
So we're navigating this very complex, very new financial system with, like, ancient emotional wiring.
That's a great way to put it. We have these deep-seated human psychologies around fear, greed, social comparison, and we're trying to apply them to financial tools and systems that are still in their infancy, relatively speaking.
Which explains why people might stumble, make choices that look weird to others, or just have totally different default settings based on their limited experience within this new system.
Precisely. What seems crazy to you is often just someone else responding logically from their perspective based on their unique history and the fact that none of us are truly experts in navigating this rapidly evolving financial landscape yet.
Okay, so let's wrap this part up. The big takeaway from the introduction, and no one's crazy, is really twofold. First, success with money hinges more on behavior than brains.
Yep. And second, understanding why people behave the way they do means recognizing that everyone's financial worldview is shaped by their own narrow, unique slice of history and experience.
Which should maybe make us a bit less judgmental of others, and maybe even ourselves.
Hopefully. And it also highlights the power of those simple, consistent behaviors. Like Ronald Reed, the janitor, just saving and being patient beat out sophisticated people who lacked behavioral control.
Right. The powerful lesson.
And it leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. Think about your own core beliefs about money, about risk, about saving, spending, investing. How much of that is truly objective and how much is just a product of the specific time and place you happen to grow up in?
And how might someone with a completely different background view your financial habits? Would they think you're the crazy one?
Something to definitely mull over.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, that's our deep dive for today.